Please don't let him hurt me. Those words came through my phone at 11:40 at night, buried inside a text about a peach pie recipe. 3 numbers underneath it. Nothing else. Just 3 numbers that turned my blood to ice water. 10 minutes later, I was kneeling on my son-in-law's back in his own kitchen, holding his wrist steady, while 2 sheriff's deputies came through the front door with their weapons drawn. He was screaming that I'd attacked him, but nobody was looking at him. They were looking at me, at the way I held his arm without breaking it, the way I breathed. Slow, even, controlled. One of the deputies studied me for a long moment, the way one soldier studies another. Then he asked me a question I hadn't heard out loud in almost 30 years. Sir, were you in the service? I looked past him, toward my daughter standing in the corner with blood on her lip. And I gave him the only answer I ever give. Retired Navy. That was all. I didn't mention the years. I didn't mention the missions nobody's supposed to talk about. I didn't mention the men I buried, or the reason I'd spent 3 decades learning how to disappear into an ordinary life. Because 3 months earlier, nobody in my family would have believed any of this was coming, least of all the man currently face down on the tile, screaming my name like it was an insult. His name was Bryce Whitfield, 39 years old, expensive truck, expensive smile, and absolutely no idea who he'd actually married into. I'm Frank Doyle. I'm 68 years old, and this is the night my son-in-law finally found out. I want to tell you honestly, I tried to like Bryce Whitfield. I wanted to like him, maybe more than I've ever wanted to like anyone in my life. Because my daughter Claire was smiling again, and I hadn't seen that particular smile since her mother was still alive. Margaret passed 12 years ago. Breast cancer. Slow and cruel. The kind that takes 18 months to finish what it starts. After she was gone, Claire was really all I had left in this world. And I think some part of me decided early on that if she was happy, I wasn't allowed to ask too many questions. So when she brought Bryce home for the first time, 10, that expensive haircut and a laugh that filled up a whole room, I told myself he was exactly what she needed. A confident man, a provider, somebody who could make her forget, for a while, how quiet our little house had become. He sold luxury trucks out past the edge of town, and he was good at it. The kind of good that comes from believing every room owes you a little applause the second you walk into it. At first, I mistook that for charm. It took me a long while to understand the difference between a man who's confident and a man who simply needs an audience. There was a work dinner, maybe 8 months into the marriage. One of those company banquets with a rented hall and a band nobody asked for. Claire wore a green dress her mother would have loved. And for most of that evening, she looked lighter than I'd seen her in years. Then, somewhere between dinner and dessert, one of Bryce's co-workers asked Claire what she did for work, and before she could finish her sentence, Bryce cut in, laughing, loud enough for the table to hear. She organizes books for a living. It's very demanding. Sometimes the books are even in the wrong order. The table laughed. Claire laughed too. A beat too fast. The kind of laugh people use to get ahead of an insult before it lands. I watched her shoulders come up just slightly toward her ears, like she was bracing for something. I noticed it because I've spent most of my life noticing things other people miss. Small movements, micro-expressions, the half second before a person decides whether they're safe or not. I told myself it was nothing. A joke. Every man makes a joke that lands wrong sometimes. That became my excuse for almost 2 years. It was nothing. It was just a joke. He didn't mean it like that. There was a Sunday dinner. Not long after, when Claire brought over a pot roast she'd worked on all afternoon. One of her mother's old recipes, and it came out a little dry. Nothing dramatic. Just dry. The way pot roast sometimes turns out when the oven runs hot. Bryce took one bite, set his fork down with a little too much ceremony, and said, "Well, good thing you're pretty, sweetheart, because you're not winning any awards in the kitchen." Everyone at the table gave that same nervous laugh people give when they're not sure if something was funny or not. Claire laughed, loudest of all, but her hand, resting on the edge of the table, curled into a fist for just a moment before she caught herself. "I want you to understand something about the years I spent in the service. You learn to read a room the way other people read a book. You learn that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one, and the quietest reaction is usually the truest one." Claire's reaction that night was quiet, and it worried me more than if she'd thrown her plate at him. I started watching more closely after that. Not obviously. I've never done anything obviously in my life. But I noticed how Bryce corrected her stories at parties. That's not how it happened. "Claire, you always exaggerate." I noticed how he'd order for her at restaurants without asking. I noticed how she'd glance at him first, almost like checking the weather. Before she answered a simple question, none of it was loud. None of it would have looked like anything to a stranger. That was the part that unsettled me most. Then came the night of the missed call. It was a Tuesday, close to midnight, and I was already in bed with the television murmuring low in the background when my phone lit up on the nightstand. Claire's name, and under it, one ring, then silence. A missed call. I sat up in the dark and stared at that little notification for a long moment. Claire never called that late. Not once in years. I called her back immediately. It rang 4 times. Then her voice came on. A little too bright. A little too fast. "Hey, Dad. Sorry. Pocket dial. Everything's fine. Go back to sleep. Everything's fine." I've heard those 2 words spoken 1,000 different ways in my life. By soldiers bleeding out on stretchers. By young men trying to reassure their mothers on the phone one last time. I know exactly what "everything's fine" sounds like when it's true. That wasn't it. I lay awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was imagining things. That an old man with too much history sometimes goes looking for danger where there isn't any. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. I didn't know that somewhere in that house across town, the man my daughter had married was already becoming someone else entirely, and that within a matter of weeks, an old code I'd taught her when she was 16 years old would be the only thing standing between her and something I couldn't undo. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a family right before something breaks. And looking back now, I think ours started that following Thanksgiving. Claire had always loved cooking with her mother. Sweet potato casserole, homemade rolls. That pecan pie recipe Margaret guarded like a state secret. After Margaret passed, Claire kept making those same dishes every year, like she was keeping a small part of her mother alive at that table. I never told her how much that meant to me, because back then, I didn't tell people things like that. They still don't. Most days. That Thanksgiving, the turkey came out a little dry. Nothing dramatic. The kind of dry that happens to every cook once in a while. Bryce carved himself a slice, chewed it slowly, theatrically, and announced to the whole table, "Well, good thing you're pretty, sweetheart, because you're not winning Top Chef this year." The table laughed that same nervous laugh. Claire laughed too. But I watched her hands, and this time, I watched something new. Her shoulders didn't just rise. They tightened, all at once, like she'd been struck before the joke had even finished landing. That's not a normal reaction to a bad joke. That's a reaction your body learns after enough bad jokes. Stop being jokes at all. I started paying closer attention after that day. The way I used to pay attention to a perimeter before I trusted it was secure. At Christmas, he mocked a sweater. Claire's aunt had knitted her, called it something a grandmother would wear to a funeral, right in front of the woman who made it. At Easter, he snapped at Claire in the driveway because she'd forgotten to bring ice for the cooler. his voice sharp enough that two neighbors looked over from their yard. At every family dinner after that, he corrected her stories, cut off her sentences, filled in details that weren't his to fill in. That's not how it happened. You always exaggerate. Small cuts, constant ones, and every single time, Claire smiled through it. That smile worried me more than tears ever could have. Around that same stretch of time, I noticed something in myself I wasn't proud of. I'd catch myself sitting in my truck in Claire's driveway. Engine off, just staring at the house for a minute before going inside, working up the nerve to ask her if she was all right. And then walking in and asking about the weather instead. I want to be honest with you about something. I wasn't an easy father in those years after Margaret died. Grief, in my generation, wasn't something you sat with. It was something you outran. So that's exactly what I did. I fixed engines that didn't need fixing. I mowed a lawn twice in 1 week. I kept my hands busy and my mouth shut. And somewhere in all that busyness, my daughter grew into an adult while I was standing 3 feet away. Present in body and absent in every other way that mattered. Claire needed her father in those years. And instead, she got a man who changed the subject every time the conversation turned toward feelings. I think now that some of what happened to her, some of the silence she carried into her marriage, started right there in our own living room, long before Bryce ever said a cruel word to her. That's a hard thing for a man my age to admit out loud, but it's the truth. And I promised myself a long time ago that I was done running from the truth. There was a Sunday in early July when I invited Claire and Bryce over for a small cookout. Nothing fancy. Burgers. Corn. A store-bought potato salad I doctored up with extra mustard the way Margaret used to. Bryce had clearly been drinking before he even arrived. I caught the smell of it under his cologne when he clapped me on the shoulder near the grill. At some point in the evening, Claire came inside to help me carry plates to the kitchen. The moment we were alone, out of Bryce's sight, she reached for a stack of plates, and her sleeve rode up just slightly. There was a bruise near her wrist, pale yellow at the edges, the kind that's already a week into healing. She saw me notice, and she pulled her sleeve back down so fast it was like a reflex. "What happened there?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Nothing," she said. Not looking at me, I bumped it on the car door. I've spent a career listening to people lie under far worse pressure than a kitchen counter. And I know the difference between a lie someone tells casually and a lie someone tells because the truth terrifies them more than the lie does. "Claire," I said again, softer this time. "Dad, please. One word. Please." Not annoyed, not defensive, afraid. That single word told me more than any bruise could have. I let it go that night. Because she asked me to, and because some old, cowardly part of me was grateful for an excuse not to push further. But after everyone left and the house went quiet, I found myself walking out to the garage instead of going to bed. Otis, my old lab, followed me out and settled by my workbench, while rain started tapping softly against the roof. I stood in front of an old wooden storage chest I hadn't opened in years. And for a long moment, I just looked at it, my hand resting on the lid, without lifting it. I already knew what was inside. Photographs of men who never made it home. A folded flay. A few medals I never wear. And one laminated card I hadn't thought about in a very long time. I didn't open the chest that night. Not yet. But I stood there in the quiet, with the rain coming down and my daughter's voice still echoing in my head. "Please." And some old instinct I hadn't felt in years quietly told me I was going to need what was inside that box a lot sooner than I wanted to believe. The night it finally happened started out like nothing at all. I'd made myself a late dinner, some leftover stew and stale cornbread, and I was sitting in my chair with the television turned down low. More for the company of the sound than anything actually being said. Otis was asleep by the back door, Rain had been falling steady since sundown. That soft, relentless coastal rain that doesn't announce itself. Just settles in and stays. Around midnight, my phone lit up on the side table. A text from Claire. My daughter almost never texted that late, and something in me went still before I even picked up the phone. "Hey, Dad, can you send me Mom's peach pie recipe underneath it?" No punctuation. No explanation. 3 numbers. 3, 9, 1. I want to explain to you what those numbers meant, because it matters. When Claire was 16 years old, I sat her down at our kitchen table one evening and taught her something most fathers never think to teach their daughters. Not because I expected anything terrible to happen to her, but because of what I'd spent my career learning about the world and about the kind of danger that doesn't always look dangerous until it's standing in front of you. I taught her simple phrases, ways to signal she needed help without saying so out loud, in case she was ever somewhere she couldn't speak freely. We treated it almost like a game back then. She used to roll her eyes at me. "Dad, you watch too many movies." Maybe I did. But I made her memorize one rule above all the others. And I made her repeat it back to me until she had it word for word. "If you ever send me the real code, come. No questions. No hesitation. No matter what time it is. No matter where I am. No matter what it costs." 3. Nina. One meant only one thing in the language we'd built together all those years ago. Immediate danger. "Something is happening right now. Call the police and come." I sat there staring at that phone for maybe 2 full seconds. And in those 2 seconds, something inside me that had been asleep for a very long time simply woke back up. I didn't feel panic. I want you to understand that. Because people misunderstand fear when they're young. Young men think fear is loud. A pounding heart. Shaking hands. A voice that cracks. But real fear, the kind that arrives when someone you love may be in danger, doesn't announce itself that way at all. It goes quiet, cold, focused. Every wasted motion falls away. And what's left is just the next right action. And then the one after that. I was up and moving before I'd fully processed what I was doing. I called 911 from the truck, already backing out of the driveway. Rain coming down harder now. Wipers struggling to keep up. The dispatcher's voice was young, a little uncertain. "Sir, can you describe the situation? Possible domestic assault in progress." I told her, my voice steadier than I expected. "Female victim inside the residence. Male suspect intoxicated. Do you know if weapons are involved? Unknown." "Sir, are you currently heading to the house?" "Yes." "Please wait for responding officers." "Sir." I looked out at the wet road ahead of me, red taillights disappearing into the rain somewhere far off. And I told her the truth. "No. Mom, I won't be doing that." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Carefully, sir. Are you armed?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "What kind of firearm locked in the vehicle?" I told her, "I don't intend to use it unless there's no other choice left." That part was true. I need you to understand that about men like me, people assume retired military men are looking for a reason to use what they know. Most of us spend the rest of our lives trying very hard to avoid it. Her voice softened, just slightly. "Officers are 4 minutes out." "Sir, I'll handle things until then," I said, and I ended the call before she could argue with me. Claire's neighborhood sat near the edge of town, past a stalled housing development that never quite recovered after the pandemic. Dark lots, wet pavement, no movement anywhere. By the time I pulled up across the street from her house, the rain had eased into a fine drizzle, and every light downstairs was burning. I could hear shouting before I even got out of the truck. Crossing that yard, I felt every one of my 68 years in my knees and my shoulders, the way I hadn't felt them in years. But there are things training leaves in your body long after the rest of you has slowed down. Balance, timing, the particular quiet of moving without being seen. I came around the side toward the kitchen window, and everything I'd been telling myself for 2 years, that I was imagining things, that it was nothing, that every marriage has rough patches. All of it disappeared the moment I looked through that glass. Claire was pressed back against the counter, crying, a thin line of blood at her lip. Bryce stood inches from her face, shouting. Broken glass scattered across the floor between them. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her stumble sideways into the cabinet. Something inside me went completely still. Not angry yet. I want to be clear about that, because it surprises people when I tell it. Anga is a hut, careless thing, and there was nothing careless left in me in that moment. What I felt was closer to the stillness you feel watching a predator get too close to something you'd die before you let it touch. The patio door was open just a few inches. Rain drifting in through the gap. Curtains stirring softly. I could hear him clearly now. You think your daddy's going to save you, Claire tried to pull away. Please. Stop. He shoved her shoulder. Hard enough to frighten. Not hard enough to fall. That was the last thing I watched from outside that glass. I stepped through the door without a sound. And for one more second, Bryce Whitfield had no idea that the quiet old man from the barbecues, the one he liked to joke about, the one he'd laughed at more times than I could count, was standing directly behind him. The old hardwood floor barely made a sound under my boots. But Claire saw me before Bryce did. Her eyes went wide over his shoulder, and one word slipped out of her before she could stop it. Dad. Bryce turned around slowly. And for one strange, unbelievable moment, he actually smiled at me. The kind of smile a man gives when he still believes he's the most dangerous thing in the room. Well, look who's here, he said, slurring slightly, rocking back on his heels. Captain America. I kept walking toward him, slow and even, the same pace I'd have used, clearing a room that wasn't secure yet. Step away from her, I said. He laughed, spreading his arms wide like he was performing for an audience. Only he could see. Or what? Old man, step away from my daughter. Behind him, Claire's breathing had gone shallow and fast. The sound of someone trying very hard not to make a sound at all. Bryce took 2 steps toward me instead, jabbing a finger in my direction. You know what your problem is. Frank, everybody in this family treats you like some wise old war hero, and you're just a retired nobody who fixes lawnmowers. I didn't answer him. In my experience, real danger has never needed to announce itself. It was the loud men, the ones who needed everyone watching, who were usually the safest ones in the room. It's the quiet ones you learn to watch closely. He took one more step, and the moment his right shoulder dropped forward, some part of me that had been dormant for 30 years simply woke up and went to work without asking my permission. It wasn't a fight. I want to be honest about that, because people imagine something dramatic when they hear a story like this. And the truth is almost disappointing in its simplicity. One motion, I redirected his arm, turned him with his own momentum, and brought him down onto the kitchen tile before he'd even finished the sentence he was building in his head. What the hell? He shouted, more shock than pain in his voice. I had his wrist pinned behind his back. Careful. Controlled. Enough pressure to hold him. Not enough to break anything. Claire stood frozen by the counter, both hands over her mouth, crying. Bryce bucked once, trying to twist free. I adjusted the pressure just slightly, and he gasped and went still. You're hurting me, he yelled. You're not hurt. I told him, my voice level. You're restrained. That answer seemed to make him angrier than anything else that night. He spat curses at the floor. At me. At nobody in particular. while I knelt there with my knee against his shoulder blade, waiting. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds before red and blue light swept across the living room windows. 2 deputies came through the front door fast, weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to show their hands. I released my grip slowly, raised one palm, and kept my voice calm. Victim secure. Suspect restrained. Both deputies froze for half a second, the way people do when a scene doesn't match what they expected to walk into. The younger one kept his weapon trained on Bryce. The older one, gray at the temples, looked at me for a long moment, taking in the way I was kneeling, the way I was breathing, the way my hands were steady. "Sir," he said, "can you stand up slowly for me?" I nodded once and rose off Bryce carefully. The second the pressure lifted, Bryce rolled over, already shouting. This psycho attacked me. Look at him. He's insane. He came into my house. The deputy didn't even glance his way. Instead, he turned toward Claire. "Mom, are you hurt?" Claire's lip trembled. Yes. That single word changed everything in that room. The younger deputy had Bryce in handcuffs within seconds, reading him his rights over his furious protests, while the older one stepped closer to me, his voice dropping low. "You military retired Navy," I said. His eyes flicked briefly to the way I'd held Bryce down, then back to my face. "You handled yourself real professional in there." Professionally. As if this had been just another job. As if the girl crying against that counter wasn't my daughter. Once the paramedics arrived and Bryce was secured in the back of a patrol car, still shouting through the glass, Claire finally broke. Real tears. The kind that come from somewhere much older than that single night. I grabbed the throw blanket off the nearby chair. The same motion I used to make when she was small and scared of thunderstorms, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're safe now," I told her. She grabbed onto my arm and held on like she was afraid the ground might move if she let go. And something in me nearly broke right there in that kitchen. Fathers like to believe they'll always recognize the moment their child is in danger. The truth is, sometimes it grows so slowly, so quietly, right there under your own roof, that you don't see it until it's standing in front of you with blood on its lip. The older deputy waited until the EMTs had Claire settled before he came back over to me one last time. "You did the right thing tonight," he said. "But I gotta ask, most guys your age, they'd have called it in and waited on the porch." I looked past him, toward the ambulance lights washing over the wet street, and I gave him the only honest answer I had. "She's my daughter," I said. "I don't wait on porches for her." He nodded slowly, the way one man nods at another when there's nothing left worth saying. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself feel exactly how frightened I'd been the whole time. Now that there was finally nothing left to do but feel it. The strangest part about a house after violence is the silence that follows it. Not a peaceful kind, a heavy kind. The sort that settles into the walls and the furniture like smoke that won't quite clear. Claire stayed with me after that night. She slept in her old bedroom upstairs, the one with the faded horse posters she'd put up when she was 13 and never bothered to take down. I hadn't changed much in there over the years. Same quilt Margaret sewed by hand. Same little ceramic lamp, shaped like a lighthouse. Some part of me, I think, had always hoped she'd end up back in that room someday. Just never like this. The first morning, I woke before sunrise out of old habit and made coffee the way I always have. Strong enough to stand a spoon in. Rain was still tapping against the windows, and Otis lay by the back door, snoring softly. Claire came down wearing one of my old navy sweatshirts, and in the morning light, her lip looked worse than it had the night before. Purple swelling, a small cut at the corner that hadn't quite closed. Seeing it in daylight did something to my chest that the darkness had spared me from the night before. She avoided my eyes while she poured her coffee. "Sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. For all of this, that single sentence told me more than any bruise could have. People who've done nothing wrong don't apologize for surviving. Victims do. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "You don't owe me an apology." "Sweetheart." Her eyes filled instantly, and she looked away. I should have left him sooner. I thought about that for a long moment before I answered. "Maybe," I said honestly, "because I've never believed in comforting someone with a lie. But fear keeps people in bad places longer than it should. That's not weakness. That's just what fear does." Neither of us spoke for a while after that. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said something that went straight through me. "I didn't want you to think I'd failed." At 68 years old, after war and funerals and everything else this life had handed me, I didn't expect a single sentence to cut clean through my chest the way that one did. Because the truth was, some of that failure belonged to me, not her. I wasn't an easy father in the years after Margaret died. My generation was raised to believe grief was something you outran, not something you sat with. And so I kept myself busy instead of present. And my daughter grew up learning to carry things alone, because that's exactly what she'd watched me do. A few days later, on the back porch, with rain drifting across the marsh behind the house, and Otis chasing something invisible through the wet grass, Claire finally started talking. Really talking. For the first time since that night, he wasn't always like this, she said, wrapping both hands around a mug of tea. At first he was charming, funny, protective. Avon. That's usually how it starts. I told her. She nodded slowly. After the wedding, little things changed. He'd criticize my friends. Then it was my clothes. Then it was just how I talked. I listened without interrupting, because I've learned that people rarely need solutions in that first telling. They need somewhere safe to finally say the truth out loud. If dinner wasn't ready when he wanted it, she went on, he'd get cold. If I disagreed with him in front of people, I'd pay for it later. What kind of paying? I asked, already dreading the answer. Silent treatment. At first, her voice grew smaller, then yelling. Then, the first time he shoved me. He cried afterward, said it was the stress from work, said it would never happen again. I closed my eyes for just a moment. I knew that pattern, the way I know the sound of my own name. Apology. Excuse. A short stretch of kindness. And then it happens again. A little worse each time. I kept thinking if I was calmer, Claire said, wiping her cheeks. If I was better somehow, things would go back to how they were in the beginning. That's not how men like that work. I told her gently, I know that now. I didn't always. She looked at me carefully, and I could see it wasn't only fear sitting behind her eyes. It was shame. That's something people misunderstand about what she went through. Shame traps a person almost as tightly as fear does, especially in families that were taught to protect appearances above almost everything else. I was embarrassed, she admitted. I thought people would think I'd chosen the wrong man. Everybody chooses wrong sometimes, I said. She shook her head. Not Mom. That one landed harder than she probably intended. Margaret had been warm where I was distant, gentle where I was disciplined, and Claire had inherited every bit of her mother's softness. I think, in the end, that softness was exactly what a man like Bryce had learned to mistake for weakness. A few days after that conversation, a detective named Reyes came by the house. Mid-40s. Direct. No patience for wasted time. She sat at my kitchen table with a folder of paperwork, while Claire twisted a tissue nervously in her lap. We pulled data from his phone and laptop. Detective Reyes said, "There's a pattern here that supports ongoing abuse." Claire stared down at the table for a long moment. Then, quietly, "There's more." Reyes raised an eyebrow. Claire reached into her purse and pulled out an old flash drive, her hand shaking slightly as she set it on the table. "I started recording him a few months ago," she said. "The arguments, I don't know why. I just wanted proof, in case anyone ever asked me if I was exaggerating." The room went completely still. Detective Reyes plugged the drive into her laptop, and the first clip that played lasted only about 40 seconds. Shouting, something breaking. Claire's voice, thin and frightened. Underneath it all, then one sentence from Bryce came through clearly enough to freeze my blood, solid. "If your father ever gets involved, I'll make sure he regrets it." Detective Reyes pulled the headphones away slowly and looked up. "Well," she said quietly, "that's going to help your case a great deal." Claire looked ashamed all over again. "I know recording him was probably wrong." Reyes shook her head firmly. "No, honey, surviving isn't wrong. I watched that sentence land on my daughter like something physical, like a weight lifting off her shoulders for the very first time in longer than either of us could say. I never expected to wear that uniform again. Not at my age. Not after everything I'd already buried in that attic along with it. The last time I'd put it on was for Margaret's funeral, 12 years earlier. And even then, I'd only worn the jacket because she'd once told me it reminded her that underneath all my quiet, there was still a man who used to carry himself proudly. After she was gone, I folded it away and figured it would stay there until somebody folded me away too. Bryce's preliminary hearing came in late October. One of those gray, damp Carolina mornings that settles right into your joints. Claire sat beside me outside the courtroom, both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked stronger than she had in weeks, but still fragile in the way people are when healing hasn't finished its work yet. Some mornings she smiled easily. Other mornings she barely left the guest room. I'd learned a long time ago that trauma moves in waves, not straight lines. Inside, Bryce looked smaller than I remembered him. Not physically, something else. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by county-issued clothes that didn't fit quite right. And weeks in a holding cell had carved dark circles under his eyes. But the bitterness hadn't left him. The moment he saw me sitting beside Claire, his jaw tightened like a fist. His attorney stood first. And within minutes, he was painting a familiar picture. A stressed husband, a hard-working provider pushed past his limits. A man, the lawyer said, who'd simply lost control for one unfortunate evening. Then he turned toward me. "Mr. Doyle," he said, "used excessive and unnecessary force against my client, well beyond what the situation called for." I sat perfectly still. I'd expected that. Men like Bryce rarely go down without trying to drag someone else with them. Then, halfway through his argument, the attorney pulled out something I hadn't expected at all. "In fact," he continued, holding up a thin folder, "Mr. Doyle's own military record isn't as clean as the prosecution would like this court to believe." The room went quiet in a different way. Claire's hand found mine under the table. It turned out Bryce's lawyer had dug up an old disciplinary write-up from decades earlier. A formal reprimand from an incident during a training exercise that had gone wrong under my command. One man injured. No deaths. But enough paperwork at the time to leave a mark on my file. It had been resolved 30 years ago. It had nothing to do with the man kneeling on that kitchen floor protecting his daughter, but for a few long minutes, the defense tried to turn 30-year-old paperwork into a character portrait of an unstable man with a history of losing control. I sat there and let him say it. I'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you can do in a room like that is react. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Ortiz, waited patiently until the defense finished. and then calmly reminded the court that a reprimand from 3 decades ago involving a training accident had absolutely nothing to do with a documented pattern of domestic abuse, corroborated by medical records, audio evidence, and body cam footage from the night in question. Then came that footage. The courtroom watched in silence as the deputies' cameras played back the scene from that kitchen. There I was, calm, controlled, holding Bryce down without ever once raising a fist against him. No rage, no excess, just containment. Beside it, from another angle, Bryce could be heard shouting drunken threats while Claire cried against the counter with blood on her lip. Whatever the defense had built with that old file collapsed the moment that footage finished playing. Bryce still wasn't finished trying to save himself. When he took the stand, he blamed the alcohol. He blamed stress. He blamed Claire for being, in his words, too emotional. Then he looked directly at me and said, "The thing that finally broke something loose in my daughter." He turned her against me. Claire stood before the prosecutor had even finished asking her next question, her voice shaking at first, then steadying with every word. "No," she said. "My father didn't turn me against anyone." She took a slow breath. "He saved my life." The room went completely silent. Claire described, in detail, years of isolation, insults, and walking on eggshells in her own home. Several jurors looked visibly moved. One older woman in the front row wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Then Claire said something that hit me harder than anything from that old training file ever could. I stopped recognizing myself during that marriage. War wounds soldiers. But I understood in that moment that abuse does something different. It doesn't wound all at once. It erases a person slowly, while they're still standing right in front of you. During a recess, Ortiz found me near the vending machines in the hallway. "You were special warfare, weren't you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. I nodded once. "My brother was recon," she said, almost smiling. "That old write-up they pulled means nothing. By the way, I want you to know that," I figured. I told her, "Your restraint that night probably saved this whole case." She added, "If you'd lost your temper and really hurt him, the defense would have spent this entire hearing talking about you instead of what he did to her." I nodded slowly, because she was right, and because it had taken me most of my life to fully understand that particular lesson. Revenge feels satisfying for exactly as long as it takes to regret it. Restraint protects the people you love far longer than anger ever could. The final sentencing hearing came 6 weeks later. That morning, I climbed up into the attic and opened the old garment bag I hadn't touched in over a decade. The fabric still smelled faintly of cedar. I pinned my medals back onto the chest one at a time. And with each one, a memory came back I hadn't visited in years. Friends laughing in the back of a helicopter. Letters written home that never got sent. Funerals with folded flags handed to mothers who couldn't stop shaking. When I walked into that courthouse in my dress whites, conversations stopped. Even Claire stared at me for a long moment. "You never wear that," she whispered. "I know," I said. "You look different." Maybe I did. Or maybe, for the first time in years, she was finally seeing all the parts of me I'd spent a lifetime keeping hidden in an attic, right along with everything else I never talked about. Winter moved slowly after the sentencing, the way everything moves slowly once you reach a certain age. Not healing, not trust, not forgiveness. All of it arrives one careful step at a time. And I'd learned long ago not to rush any of it. The judge had given Bryce real time, along with mandatory alcohol treatment, a domestic violence program, and a permanent restraining order that meant he'd never again have the right to walk into a room where Claire was standing. As the deputies led him out that day, he stopped near the door and looked back at her one last time. His eyes were wet, and for once, they didn't look like they were performing for anyone. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Claire didn't answer him. She just held my hand and watched him disappear through the doors. And for the first time in longer than either of us could remember, the fear behind her eyes was simply gone. By February, the cold Carolina rain had finally softened into something gentler, and Claire found a small apartment above a florist shop downtown, run by a widow named Diane, who never asked questions she didn't need to ask. The place wasn't much, but morning light filled the kitchen. And after everything, that was enough. Safety has a way of becoming beautiful once you've lived without it. She went back to work part-time at the library, worried at first that people would whisper about the trial. Small towns surprise you sometimes. Most folks treated her gently, especially the older women, the ones who'd lived long enough to recognize real pain when they saw it walking past the checkout counter. I did some healing of my own that winter, though I didn't call it that at the time. A retired Marine named Hal, who I'd known for years without ever really knowing, talked me into showing up for Wednesday breakfast at the VFW hall. I resisted at first. Too many memories waiting in a room like that. But I went anyway. And I found out that old soldiers spend far less time reliving the war than people assume. Mostly we talked about grandkids, bad knees, and boats that wouldn't start. Al told me one morning that I seemed lighter lately. I thought about that the whole drive home, and decided he was right. Not happy. Exactly. Just lighter. Like something heavy had finally shifted off my shoulders after 30 years in the same place. That spring, Claire brought my grandson Eli over for Sunday dinner. Something Bryce had rarely allowed on his own. Eli Voston, missing a front tooth, endlessly curious, and he ran through my backyard like he'd always owned the place. Children recover faster than adults do, if you give them enough safety early enough. We sat by the lake behind my property that afternoon, fishing for bluegill while dragonflies skimmed the water. Eli studied me for a while before asking if I was really in the Navy. And when I told him yes, he grinned and said his mom told him I once tackled his dad like Batman. I nearly choked, laughing, and told him his mother exaggerated. He insisted she didn't. Then he went quiet for a minute, the way children do right before they ask the question that matters. Why was Dad so mean? I looked out over the water for a long moment before I answered him honestly. Sometimes people carry anger they never learned how to control. Did he hate Mom? No. I said, that's what makes it sad. Some people confuse love with ownership. Eli considered that seriously. The way children sometimes understand more than grown men give them credit for. And then he asked for the fishing rod back. And that was the end of it. At least for one afternoon. One evening that summer, Claire showed up at my door holding an envelope with no return address. I recognized the prison stamp before she said a word. We sat together at my kitchen table while I opened it. The letter was handwritten, messy in places, and there wasn't a single excuse buried anywhere in it. Bryce wrote about his drinking, about needing control because he'd never felt like enough without it, about the shame that had been sitting underneath all of it the whole time. One line stayed with me longer than the rest. I spent years trying to feel powerful by making someone else feel small. What do you think? Claire asked quietly once I'd finished. I think remorse is a hard thing to sit with, when it's real. I told her, do you forgive him? I've learned at my age that forgiveness isn't a switch you flip once and never think about again. It's a decision you make over and over, sometimes daily, sometimes through gritted teeth. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. She nodded slowly, like that was exactly the answer she'd expected. Then, after a long, quiet moment, she said something that nearly undid me completely. Thank you for saving me. Dad. I looked at my daughter across that table. Healthier now. Still healing. Still finding her footing. And I told her the truth. I hadn't saved her alone. She'd saved herself the moment she found the courage to ask for help in the first place. And not everyone finds that kind of courage when they need it most. A few Sundays later, Our family gathered around that same table again. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, the kind of meal Margaret used to make when money was tight, but nothing else ever was. Sunlight came through the kitchen windows while Eli laughed at something on the television in the other room. And Claire looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the forced kind of peaceful, the real kind. Sitting there, listening to plates, clatter, and voices fill a house that had been far too quiet for far too long. I finally understood something it had taken me almost 70 years to learn. Strength isn't about winning a fight. War taught me that strength means surviving pain, but growing old taught me the rest of it. Strength is answering the phone when someone you love is afraid. Strength is staying calm when anger would be so much easier. Strength is protecting the people who need you, without losing whatever's left of your own humanity in the process. And sometimes, strength is finally letting yourself heal. 2. If this story reached something in you tonight, if you've ever protected someone you love, or carried a quiet weight nobody else could see, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember this, no matter your age, it is never too late to choose kindness over control, peace over pride, and love over fear. People ask me sometimes if I regret that night, if some part of me wishes I'd waited on the porch like the dispatcher told me to. I don't, not for one single second, because I've buried young men who never got the chance to grow old. I've knelt beside soldiers who ran out of time before they ran out of courage. And I promised myself a long time ago that if the day ever came when someone I loved needed me, I would never, ever be the reason help arrived. 1 minute too late. Claire is 31 years old now. She laughs the way her mother used to laugh, from somewhere deep in her chest, without checking first to see if it's allowed. Eli spends every other weekend at my place, and Otis still sleeps by the back door like he's waiting for someone. Some evenings, I catch myself standing in the kitchen doorway just watching them, and I think about how close we came to losing all of it. I spent 26 years believing strength meant staying silent, carrying weight alone, never asking for help, never admitting fear. I was wrong. Real strength is a daughter finding the courage to send 3 numbers into the night. Real strength is a father who finally shows up, not with anger, but with everything he's ever learned about protecting the people he loves. And real strength is choosing, every single day afterward, to heal instead of hate. If somebody in your life is hurting quietly, please look closer. And if you're the one hurting, please believe me when I tell you. There is no shame in sending your own version of that text. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me, does your family have a code word of your own? And if this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear tonight that it is never too late to come home.